"Step aside, ma'am," the gate agent said, his eyes flicking over her like she was an inconvenience. "This line is for first-class passengers only." The words were polite, but the tone was anything but. The officers were already approaching, eyes trained on Evelyn like she was a problem to be solved, a threat to the smooth operation of their system. The reason? Her black skin. The assumption? She didn't belong here. Evelyn Carter had done nothing wrong. Her ticket was valid, her boarding pass scanned, and yet, as she stood in line, her place in the system, her place in that moment, was being questioned. Not because she didn't fit the criteria, not because she wasn't entitled to the seat in first class, but because she didn't look like someone who was supposed to be there. Her fingers, though steady, tightened slightly around the edges of the boarding pass in her hand, as the gate agent's gaze lingered too long. His look was cold, calculated, the subtle shift of his eyes as he glanced at the man behind her in a designer suit. The casual, dismissive motion of his hand when he waved her aside, as if to say, "You don't belong here." They didn't see her. Not really. They saw the color of her skin and assumed what that meant. They assumed she wasn't a first-class passenger. They assumed she didn't belong in that space. The same space that had been designed for people who looked like the man behind her in the suit. People who had always been given the benefit of the doubt. People who were automatically given permission to be in that space. Security was called. The officers arrived quickly, their presence a mere formality, a shadow of authority designed to reinforce a message. This is not where you belong. They didn't ask her for her ID. They didn't check her boarding pass again. They didn't question the fact that she had already cleared TSA with her valid pre-check pass. All they knew was that she was out of place. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that the woman they had just tried to push aside wasn't just another passenger. She wasn't just a black woman caught in the middle of a casual act of profiling. She was more. She had power, and not the kind of power they were used to seeing. This is where the system starts to crack. The quiet, invisible system that is always at work, silently excluding, silently rejecting. It's in moments like these, the small, almost imperceptible actions, that we see how power works in our world. Power isn't always a man in a suit, standing on a podium. Power isn't always loud and boisterous. Sometimes, power is the quiet glance, the dismissive gesture, the unspoken rule that says, "You're not supposed to be here." And when you fight back against that power, when you refuse to accept the roles they've given you, that's when things start to change. Evelyn stood there, unflinching. She didn't shout. She didn't argue. She didn't protest. She just waited, calm, collected, unwavering. It was a power that no one expected. The power of being underestimated. The power of being unseen, but knowing exactly who you are and what you're capable of. She had learned long ago that the system worked best when you simply didn't fight it, when you let it show its true face. And Evelyn wasn't about to make this easy for them. The officers began to speak in low voices to one another, their whispers barely audible above the noise of the terminal. It wasn't clear if they were questioning the situation or simply going through the motions, knowing that Evelyn would just go along with it, knowing that people like her always did. The system was designed to expect compliance. It was designed to ignore and control. But Evelyn's presence wasn't a sign of compliance. It was a challenge. It's funny, isn't it? How easily we are led to believe in the assumptions we make about others. How quickly we decide who belongs and who doesn't, based on what we see, based on the outside. It doesn't matter that Evelyn had the same ticket as everyone else in that line. It didn't matter that she was as qualified to be in that seat as anyone else. What mattered was that she didn't look the way they expected her to look. Let me ask you, how many times have you been judged simply because of how you look? How many times have you been dismissed or overlooked because of assumptions others made about you? Think about it. How many times have you stood in a room, or in a line, or in a space where you weren't seen for who you really were, but for the way people perceived you? How did that make you feel? Let me know in the comments below. I want to hear your stories. Don't forget to hit like if you've ever felt that sting of being underestimated, and make sure you subscribe. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Evelyn was moved aside, her calmness still unshaken. She didn't fight back. She didn't raise her voice. She simply let the system do its thing. And in that moment, the system, which had been designed to control, began to expose itself. She wasn't going to make a scene. She wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing her angry. She was simply going to show them who had the real power here. They thought they were in control. They thought they could remove her from the equation, push her back into the invisible space where people like her belonged. But Evelyn didn't fight their system. She didn't push back. She simply stood still and let it collapse under its own weight. And as they pulled her aside, as they thought they were taking care of the problem, they didn't know. The real problem had just begun. Isn't it curious? How quickly the system reveals its cracks when someone decides not to follow its script. Evelyn didn't shout. She didn't make a scene. But in that silence, in that stillness, she was about to disrupt everything they thought they knew. She was going to show them what happens when you challenge their assumptions. What happens when you refuse to be what they say you are. The system was never designed to deal with someone like Evelyn Carter. And now, they were going to learn the hard way. Have you ever been treated differently because of how you looked or where you came from? Have you ever felt judged just because of your appearance? Or have you ever experienced a situation where you didn't fit the role others try to force on you? Drop your thoughts below. I want to know your stories. If you've been misjudged or misrepresented, like and comment. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel to be part of this journey. We've only just begun. Evelyn Carter didn't ask for this fight. She didn't want it, but the system had forced her hand. And now, in the calm of the terminal, in the silence of being moved aside, Evelyn was going to make sure they knew one thing. She would not be silenced. The real storm was coming, and it would come quietly. And just like that, it happened. The calm was broken. The quiet resistance Evelyn had carried with her, the kind that refused to make waves, suddenly met the sharp edge of the system that had been quietly judging her from the start. She had been moved aside, but now they were pulling her out of the line altogether. 2 security officers appeared, walking toward her with an air of authority that barely hid their discomfort. Evelyn didn't flinch. She didn't react. She simply looked at the officers as they approached, their movements as rehearsed as any scripted routine. One officer glanced at the other, then spoke, his words as much an accusation as a command. Why is it that the system feels threatened by those who don't fit its mold? Why is it that someone like Evelyn, who has followed every rule, who holds a ticket just as valid as anyone else in line, suddenly becomes a target simply because she doesn't look like the other passengers around her? It's not because she did anything wrong. It's not because she's guilty of anything. It's because she doesn't look the part. She doesn't fit the mold of what they expect in first class. And in their world, in their system, that's all it takes to make you a problem. The officers, with their uniforms pressed and their faces stern, gently guide her toward the side of the terminal. The surrounding passengers are too busy with their own lives to notice the quiet scene unfolding in front of them. But for Evelyn, this moment is too familiar, being othered, pushed aside, told by the world that she doesn't belong, despite following every rule, despite doing everything right. This is the mistake. This is where the system shows its true face. They assume that because she doesn't wear the right clothes, doesn't carry the right bag, doesn't fit the profile, she's out of place. She doesn't belong in first class because she doesn't look like the others. And in their world, where people are measured by how much money they wear, how well they speak, how they look when they walk into a room, Evelyn simply doesn't add up. She's a mistake, and the system is ready to fix it. The officers stand beside her now, their actions polite but firm, the kind of politeness that doesn't feel quite right. There's a discomfort in the air, something unspoken, yet palpable. Evelyn remains still, her gaze unwavering as the officers ask her to follow them. Why does the system feel threatened by someone like Evelyn? Is it because she doesn't make sense to them? Is it because they can't box her into the neat categories they've created for the world? They see her calm demeanor, her unassuming nature, and they don't know how to react. The real mistake here is not hers, it's theirs. They've mistaken her silence for compliance, her stillness for weakness, and in doing so, they've revealed exactly what they're afraid of. As Evelyn is led further into the terminal, her movements are slow but deliberate, her eyes scanning the faces of the officers as if they were the ones in a cage. They had no idea who she was. They had no idea what she was about to do. But that didn't matter. The moment they decided she was a problem was the moment they made their first mistake. This is what happens when you don't fit the mold. When you don't look the way the world expects you to look, when you don't walk the path that others have laid out for you. The system is built on assumptions, on surface-level judgments that have nothing to do with who you are, with your value, with your right to be in a space. And when you challenge that, when you refuse to let them define you by their narrow lens, that's when you see the cracks in the system. That's when a mask comes off. Evelyn stands now in a small corner of the terminal, the officers at a distance, discussing her situation with an airport supervisor. They continue to glance at her, their whispers no longer just about procedure, but about something deeper. About her presence. About why she's here. About why she doesn't belong in a seat marked first class. What is it about people who don't fit in that scares us so much? What is it about the ones who don't follow the script, who don't fit the role, that makes the system so uncomfortable? Evelyn had done nothing wrong. She had not broken any rules. And yet, in their eyes, she was the exception, the mistake that needed to be corrected. The ones who are different, who stand outside the lines the system has drawn, are seen as problems. And it's not because they're doing anything wrong. It's because they challenge the order. They challenge the way things are supposed to be. The supervisor approaches Evelyn now, his expression a mix of caution and authority. He doesn't look at her directly at first, instead glancing at the officers, who speak to him in low tones. The supervisor finally looks up at Evelyn, studying her face with a forced politeness that barely hides the unease underneath. The moment he looked at her, Evelyn knew what he saw. He didn't see a professional. He didn't see someone who had a right to be there. He saw a woman in a hoodie, with her tote bag slung over her shoulder, someone who didn't fit in with the carefully curated world of first-class passengers. He was trying to figure out who she was, trying to decide if she deserved to be there. But what he didn't realize was that Evelyn had been asked to come to that seat. She wasn't just someone who had purchased a ticket. She was part of a much bigger game. She just needed them to expose themselves. Evelyn didn't react. She didn't protest. She simply stood there, her gaze steady, waiting for them to make the next move. The quiet pressure of the situation built up slowly, unnoticed by the others, but clear to her. This moment was no accident. She wasn't just being pushed aside for no reason. This was the system doing exactly what it was designed to do. It was trying to silence her, trying to keep her from taking a seat in the space it had carved out for people who looked a certain way. How many times have you been judged simply based on how you look? How many times has your worth been decided without you even saying a word? I know many of you can relate. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever been misjudged because you didn't look the part? If this resonates with you, hit that like button, subscribe, and stay tuned to see how Evelyn takes control of the situation. Evelyn stood there, not because she was powerless, but because she knew the game. She understood that the real power wasn't in fighting back, wasn't in making a scene. No, the real power was in standing still, watching them unravel. And as the system did exactly what it had been designed to do, Evelyn smiled on the inside. She had already won. It was only a matter of time before they realized their mistake. And when they did, that's when everything would change. The plane ascended into the sky, its engines humming softly, carrying passengers from one place to another. But for Evelyn, the journey had only just begun. As she settled into her first-class seat, she could feel the eyes on her, though they weren't as obvious as the ones in the terminal. She had made it through the gate. She had made it onto the plane. But the battle wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The system might have let her in, but it wasn't done with her yet. It wasn't going to make this easy. The flight attendants, who had ignored her in the terminal, now moved through the cabin, offering drinks to the other passengers. But Evelyn wasn't asked. No polite gesture. No welcoming smile. She was simply passed by as if she was invisible. It was subtle. It wasn't obvious. But it was there, in the way they treated her differently, in the way they bypassed her, pretending she didn't exist. The truth about power? It's never loud. It doesn't scream or shout. It doesn't demand your attention. Power moves quietly, almost imperceptibly, Power hides in plain sight, waiting for the world to expose itself. Evelyn Carter, sitting there in her seat in first class, was power in disguise. She wasn't the person they thought she was. She wasn't the passenger they expected, but they didn't see it. They didn't understand the force she carried. And so, they ignored her. They pushed her aside, in the subtle ways that only someone in her position could feel. As the flight attendants moved past, Evelyn glanced at her fellow passengers, most of them engrossed in their own worlds, looking out the windows, reading magazines, or typing on laptops. The man next to her, a middle-aged executive, glanced briefly at her and then quickly returned to his tablet, as if she wasn't even there. It wasn't overt. It didn't need to be. The system didn't need to yell. It simply needed to make sure she felt like she didn't belong. And in that moment, Evelyn knew this was the battle. This quiet, invisible war that no one else could see. How many times have you been looked over? How many times have you been excluded, not because you didn't fit the rules, but because of how you looked, how you were perceived? This is what the system does. It doesn't need to throw you out. It doesn't need to make a scene. It just needs to make you feel like you're not supposed to be there. It needs to push you to the edge, to make you question if you really belong. And in that moment, Evelyn felt it. She felt the system working its quiet magic, trying to make her doubt herself. But Evelyn wasn't here to doubt. She wasn't here to question her place. She knew exactly where she was supposed to be. As the hours passed, the flight continued to cruise. The same feeling of exclusion lingered in the air. No drinks were offered to Evelyn. No one made eye contact, but she wasn't angry. She wasn't upset. She was merely watching, observing the way the system operated. She had learned long ago that you don't fight this kind of battle with noise. You fight it with silence. You let the system expose itself for what it is. Evelyn wasn't just a passenger. She wasn't just in a seat. She wasn't just trying to make it to her destination. Evelyn was about to make the system question itself. She was about to make it realize that it had made the biggest mistake of all, underestimating her. And when the system finally realized who she was, when it finally understood the power she had, when it realized the mistake it had made, it would be too late. Evelyn's hand moved to her bag, the familiar weight of the envelope resting inside. She wasn't going to open it just yet. Not now. But the envelope contained more than documents. It contained power. It was a decision that would ripple through the airline industry. And when the time was right, it would change everything. But for now, she sat still, observing, waiting. You see, power is often misunderstood. People think it's loud. People think it's something you can see. But true power? True power is in the quiet moments. It's in the silence between the chaos. And Evelyn Carter? Evelyn knew how to sit quietly in the middle of that storm and watch it all fall apart. She knew that the real power didn't need to scream or demand attention. It simply needed to wait. The plane began its descent, the seatbelt sign flicking on, the crew moving through the cabin to ensure everything was secure. The tension was still there, but it wasn't from the flight. It was from a system, from the weight of what was about to unfold. Evelyn didn't need to rush. She didn't need to do anything. The system had already made its mistake, and now it was only a matter of time before it would have to reckon with the fact that someone they had overlooked, someone they had dismissed, was about to change everything. Have you ever felt like you weren't seen, even though you had every right to be somewhere? Have you ever had to face the invisible walls the system puts up to keep certain people out? Let us know in the comments. How do you think Evelyn should handle this situation? And if you've ever been in a situation where you didn't fit the mold, hit that like button, subscribe, and share this with your friends. Because what happens next? It will make you rethink everything. The system was about to face its reckoning. And Evelyn Carter, sitting there in her seat, the quiet calm of her demeanor hiding the storm inside, was the one who would bring it to its knees. But for now, she waited, silent, ready. Evelyn sat, the hum of the plane a constant in the background, but her mind was elsewhere. She wasn't focused on the destination. She wasn't thinking about the miles she had to travel. Evelyn's mind was on something far more pressing. The system she was challenging. The weight of the journey wasn't in the flight itself. It was in what she was about to expose. The quiet rejection she had felt since the moment she entered this world was about to be overturned. The flight attendants moved through the cabin, offering drinks and snacks, their interactions mechanical, practiced. As expected, they passed by Evelyn without a word. Her seatmate, a man with a headset in place and a laptop open, was already being served. He received a glass of wine with a smile and a quick, friendly exchange. Evelyn, on the other hand, sat quietly, her calm presence almost an inconvenience to the flight attendants. It's funny, isn't it, how the smallest actions can speak louder than the loudest words. A polite smile given to one person, a glass of wine handed to another, and yet Evelyn was ignored again. Not because she didn't deserve a drink, not because she didn't fit the mold of a first-class passenger. No, Evelyn's rejection was quiet, subtle, and yet it was still a rejection. She could feel their gaze when they passed her, fleeting, dismissive, almost as if they couldn't bring themselves to truly look at her. Not one of them offered her a drink, not even water. And that wasn't because they were busy. No, they were busy serving everyone else. But Evelyn, she didn't fit their expectations. She didn't fit the image of what they thought a first-class passenger should look like. And so, she remained invisible. This was power in its purest form. Not loud, not obvious, but powerful all the same. Evelyn had learned long ago that true power wasn't about raising your voice. It wasn't about making a scene. It was about being still. It was about watching the system expose itself. And in this moment, as she sat there, unbothered by the subtle rejection, she knew what they were doing. They were trying to make her feel small. They were trying to make her feel invisible. But Evelyn Carter, she was already rewriting the rules. The flight continued, and the cabin slowly began to settle. A few more passengers boarded, all greeted with the customary smiles and polite exchanges. Some were served drinks immediately. Others settled into their seats without a glance. And Evelyn, she remained in her seat, calm, composed, a silent observer of it all. But inside, she could feel the storm brewing. The system might be trying to exclude her, but Evelyn knew better. She knew that silence was just as powerful as any protest. And soon, they would realize it too. The irony, of course, was that Evelyn didn't need to fight back. She didn't need to raise her voice or cause a scene. The system was already fighting itself. It was exposing itself for what it really was, a hierarchy built on assumptions, on judgments, on who looked the part. And Evelyn was the living, breathing challenge to that very system. She wasn't going to break it with noise. She was going to break it with stillness. The flight attendants made their rounds again. This time, as one of them neared Evelyn's row, she paused, just for a moment, her eyes flicking toward the seating chart in front of her. She looked at Evelyn, then back at the passenger beside her, before moving on. No drink, no acknowledgement, just a quick look, then away. Evelyn didn't react. She didn't flinch. She simply waited. It's strange, isn't it? The way a person can stand in front of you, sit next to you, occupy the same space, and yet you're made to feel like they don't even exist. It's not done with loud words or overt actions. No, the system does it quietly, with a glance, with a dismissive gesture, with a small moment that goes unnoticed by most. But not by Evelyn. She saw it all. She saw the subtle exclusion, the quiet judgment, the unspoken rules that kept her out of the spaces she was supposed to be in. Evelyn's hand moved to her tote bag once more. The weight of the envelope inside was a constant reminder of the decision she had yet to make. She had the power, but she also understood the weight of her choices. The envelope contained more than just documents. It held the key to a larger shift, the catalyst for the corporate world that was about to be rocked to its core. But she didn't open it yet. Not because she was afraid, but because she knew that timing was everything. The system doesn't know it yet, but Evelyn is in control. It's the quiet moments like these, when the world expects you to react, that hold the most power. When they think they have you figured out, when they think you're invisible, when they think you're small. That's when you show them exactly what you're capable of. And Evelyn, she wasn't about to let them underestimate her. Have you ever been in a situation where you were treated differently based on assumptions? Where you were ignored or pushed aside, even though you had every right to be there? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. How would you handle a situation like this? Let me know if you've ever felt invisible in a space you were entitled to be in. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you've ever felt excluded, and share this with your friends. The story is far from over. Evelyn sat in her seat, the weight of the envelope in her lap, the weight of the system's quiet rejection pressing against her shoulders. But it didn't matter. She wasn't there to fight. She was there to observe, to let the system show its true face. And when it did, that's when everything would change. The hum of the aircraft filled the cabin, a steady reminder that they were all moving forward. The passengers, for the most part, were oblivious. They were lost in their own worlds, tapping away on laptops, scrolling through their phones, reading the latest news. But Evelyn sat in the quiet before the storm, her eyes fixed on the small details. The way the flight attendants moved around the cabin, the way her seatmate continued to tap away at his tablet, the way the air itself seemed to carry a weight that no one else could see. She had already learned that silence could be louder than any protest. It was her weapon now. The system didn't need her to speak. It didn't need her to scream for justice or make a scene. All it needed was for her to remain still, for her to sit calmly in the midst of everything and let them see themselves for what they really were, a machine built on assumptions, built on the idea that some people don't belong in certain spaces. And Evelyn was going to show them just how wrong they were. It's often said that power is something you can see. It's the person with the loudest voice, the most influence, the most money. But what happens when that power is hidden? What happens when the person you least expect to challenge the system is the one with the most control? Evelyn Carter was proving that power didn't have to shout. It didn't have to be obvious. It could exist in the quietest of moments, in the stillness between the noise, in the silence where no one was watching. The flight attendants moved through the cabin once more, this time with a beverage cart, offering drinks to the other passengers. But as they approached Evelyn's row, she could already feel it. She wasn't going to be served. Again, they offered drinks to the others, but when it came to her, they paused. There was hesitation, a silent judgment in the air. Evelyn could almost feel the unspoken question. Does she belong here? The attendant looked at her, not directly, but briefly. A flicker of something crossed the woman's face, a brief moment of discomfort. Then, as expected, the attendant moved on without saying a word, her eyes darting to the next row of passengers. You don't need to be loud to make a statement. Sometimes, silence speaks volumes. The flight attendants didn't need to serve her. They didn't need to acknowledge her. Their rejection wasn't about their actions. It was about what they didn't do. It was in the glance, in the brief hesitation, in the way the air around her seemed to thicken every time someone avoided looking at her. Evelyn wasn't invisible. No, she was seen. But she was seen as something that didn't belong. And that, in itself, was a form of rejection more powerful than anything loud or dramatic. Evelyn sat back in her seat, not angry, not frustrated, but quietly observing. She could feel the eyes of the passengers in first class, brief glances, fleeting stares, the subtle but sharp judgment in their gaze. She didn't belong here in their eyes. And that was exactly why she did. She didn't need to be accepted by them for validation. She was here to observe the system that had already made up its mind about her and wait for the moment when it would expose itself completely. What happens when someone refuses to follow the rules? What happens when you're written off, dismissed, ignored, and yet you continue to play the game your own way? Evelyn had learned that people don't often see what's right in front of them. They look for what fits, for what is familiar, for what they expect. They don't always see the person sitting right next to them. They don't see the quiet storm that is about to change everything. The flight continued its path through the sky, the gentle hum of the engines providing a steady rhythm. As the plane reached cruising altitude, the flight attendants returned to their routine. The captain's voice echoed through the intercom, offering the usual announcements, the soft chuckle of a flight attendant in the aisle as she smiled at a child in the row ahead. And Evelyn, she was the quiet observer, the one who saw the cracks in the system that no one else was looking for. She wasn't a disruptor in the traditional sense. She didn't need to be loud. She didn't need to fight for her place. She simply needed to exist. And with every passing moment, she could feel the system unraveling under the weight of its own assumptions. There's a certain power in being underestimated. When no one expects you to do anything, when no one expects you to fight back, that's when the real power emerges. That's when the system reveals its flaws. Evelyn Carter wasn't angry. She wasn't out to cause chaos. She was out to show the world that the system could be challenged, could be broken, not through noise, but through quiet defiance. She wasn't going to make them listen to her. She wasn't going to force them to see her. No, she was simply going to make them realize that they couldn't ignore her anymore. As the flight attendants moved down the aisle again, Evelyn glanced at them. This time, the woman who had passed her earlier stopped. For a moment, their eyes met. There was no smile, no greeting, no service offered. Just a moment of uncomfortable silence. Evelyn knew that in their eyes, she was still invisible. And yet, she wasn't. She wasn't invisible at all. She was the one holding all the cards, even if no one knew it yet. And in that moment, Evelyn Carter was more powerful than anyone could ever imagine. It was in the small things, in the moments when no one was looking, when the system thought it had control. That was where the power was. And as Evelyn sat in her seat, waiting for the moment when everything would change, she couldn't help but smile quietly to herself. The system had already exposed itself, and now it was only a matter of time before everyone else saw it too. How do you feel when the system tries to push you aside, despite you following all the rules? Have you ever felt like you didn't belong, even though you were entitled to be somewhere? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. What would you do if you were in Evelyn's position? Do you think she's doing the right thing by staying calm? Let me know. And don't forget to hit like and subscribe to stay updated, because things are about to get interesting. Evelyn Carter didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't need to fight the system. She just needed to let the world see its own flaws. And soon enough, that's exactly what would happen. Evelyn wasn't a part of their world. She was about to create a whole new one. Evelyn sat still, her hands resting on her lap. The weight of the envelope still pressed firmly against her, though no one around her knew its significance. The hum of the plane continued, but was drowned out by the quiet noise in her mind. She had already seen how the system worked. She had already felt the subtle rejection, the quiet dismissal. But she was not just here to sit through their assumptions. She was here to make the system question itself. Her eyes moved slowly over the passengers, the same ones who had glanced at her with suspicion earlier, now comfortably settled in their seats, as if nothing had happened, as if everything had returned to normal. But nothing was normal. Evelyn knew it, and deep down, so did they. The moment they looked at her and dismissed her, the moment they decided she didn't belong, that moment would echo long after the plane landed. The system had been put on notice, and Evelyn Carter wasn't going anywhere until it knew exactly what that meant. It's fascinating, really, how the system works. It doesn't confront you with a loud voice or forceful actions. No, it prefers to work quietly, silently. It's in the subtle ways it separates, divides, and controls. It's in the looks exchanged, the decisions made without words, the assumption that some people belong and others do not. But what happens when you refuse to play by those rules? What happens when you sit silently and watch the system come apart at the seams, all without ever lifting a finger? That, my friends, is the power Evelyn Carter held. The power of being underestimated, of being overlooked, of making the system reveal itself, without saying a word. In the background, a conversation began to stir. The executives of the airline merger, the ones who had been making decisions for months, were starting to feel the pressure. They didn't know it yet, but Evelyn's quiet defiance was beginning to affect them. They had no idea that the woman they had dismissed, the woman they thought was just another passenger, was quietly holding the future of their multi-billion-dollar deal in her hands. It wasn't just the flight staff who had made their mistake. No, the corporate world itself had overlooked her. The power of the system lies in its predictability. It thrives on the idea that some people are above others, that some deserve better treatment, and that certain people, based on their appearance, their race, their status, are always given the benefit of the doubt. It's an invisible hierarchy one that's so ingrained in the fabric of society that it goes unnoticed by those who benefit from it. But Evelyn Carter? Evelyn saw it. She saw it for what it really was. And she was about to make it crack wide open. The executives, still unaware of Evelyn's role, continued their meeting in another part of the plane. Unbeknownst to them, Evelyn's vote was all that stood between them and the next phase of the airline's corporate future. Her calm, her stillness, her quiet defiance, it was a test. A test to see if the system could tolerate her presence, to see if it could survive when someone like her was allowed to sit at the table and decide the future of the company. What they didn't know, what they hadn't realized, was that the power to make this deal work, or to crush it, wasn't in their hands at all. It wasn't in the hands of the men in suits and shiny shoes. It wasn't in the hands of the corporate giants sitting behind closed doors. No, the real power was in the hands of the woman who sat quietly watching them, waiting for the right moment to strike. And when that moment came, the system would be shaken to its core. Evelyn knew they were speaking of the deal, the merger that would solidify their hold on the airline industry for years to come. She knew that they were discussing the final steps, the approval needed to move forward. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that the fate of their plan didn't rest with them. It rested with her. And the final decision? It was hers to make. Her vote was the one that counted. Her approval was the one that mattered. Here's the truth about power. It's never where you expect it to be. It's never in the obvious places. Power isn't in the hands of the loudest person in the room. It's not in the ones who speak the most. It's in the silent ones, the ones who sit still, who observe, who wait for the right moment to make a move. The system, this corporate world they've built, it's designed to give power to those who fit in, to those who follow the rules. But what happens when the rules are challenged? What happens when someone decides to break them from the inside? Evelyn continued to sit in her seat, the envelope still resting in her lap. The flight attendants had passed her by once again, her fellow passengers still too engrossed in their own worlds to notice what was happening. But Evelyn noticed. She saw how the power was slowly shifting. She saw how their decisions, their assumptions, were beginning to unravel. They were in a world of their own making, a world that depended on their control. And now, they were about to see just how fragile that control really was. Soon, they would learn what it meant to challenge the status quo. Soon, they would learn that the woman they had written off, the woman they had rejected, wasn't just a passenger. She was the one who was going to decide their future. She was the one who was going to show them that their assumptions didn't matter. That power wasn't about money. It wasn't about status. It was about who held the keys to the future. Have you ever been in a situation where you knew you had the power, but others still try to push you aside? Have you ever been underestimated, just like Evelyn? Drop your stories in the comments. How would you handle a situation where your value is dismissed simply because of how you look or who you are? Let us know in the comments below. And if you're enjoying this story, hit the like button, share this with your friends, and make sure to subscribe. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next, because this is just the beginning of Evelyn's quiet revolution. Evelyn Carter wasn't just on this flight to get from point A to point B. She was on this flight to change everything. The system would bend, it would break, and it would learn to adjust to her. And in the end, it wouldn't just be the corporate world that felt the shift. The world, as they knew it, was about to change forever. The world outside the airplane window was a blur, clouds stretching out beneath them as the plane sliced through the sky. But inside, in the first-class cabin, everything felt crystal clear. Evelyn sat there, her gaze fixed on the envelope in her lap. It wasn't just any envelope. This was the moment, the thing that had been weighing her down since she arrived at the airport. It wasn't a contract. It wasn't a piece of paper just detailing facts. No, this was the turning point. This was the decision that would change everything. And Evelyn had the power to make it. The flight attendants continued to move through the cabin, still ignoring her presence, still treating her as though she didn't belong. But Evelyn wasn't looking for validation. She wasn't looking for acknowledgement. The system had already decided who was worth seeing, who was worth paying attention to. But Evelyn, she was beyond that. She was the one holding the cards. She was the one who had the final say. What do you do when you realize the power you've always had? When you finally see that the world around you is built on assumptions? Assumptions that no longer have control over you. Evelyn knew that her moment had come. She wasn't here to ask for permission. She wasn't here to beg for respect. She was here to make her mark. And as the plane soared higher, Evelyn Carter's place in the system was no longer in question. She was about to make a decision that would change everything. The decision wasn't an easy one. She could feel the weight of it, sitting in her lap like a stone that could crush or liberate her. The envelope contained the final paperwork, the approval for the next phase of the airline merger, the deal that had the power to shake the very foundation of the industry. It wasn't just a corporate decision. It was a game changer, a life-changing moment, not just for her, but for everyone involved. She had the power to approve or stop it all. And in that moment, it hit her. She held the fate of millions in her hands. In this world, power doesn't always scream for attention. It doesn't demand to be seen. Sometimes, the most powerful people are the ones who don't speak at all. Evelyn wasn't loud. She wasn't aggressive. She didn't need to be. Her power wasn't in her voice or in her outward defiance. It was in the calmness she carried. It was in the ability to move through a world that didn't see her and still make decisions that others would never dream of. The moment she decided to open that envelope, when she decided to take control, was the moment the system would break. It was the moment they would realize that Evelyn Carter was no longer a passenger. She was the one in charge. She reached for the envelope, the soft paper crinkling under her fingertips. Her hand hovered for just a moment, as if the decision she was about to make was something she could turn away from. But she couldn't. She knew this was the moment. The calmness, the stillness. It had been building to this. The system had been trying to erase her, trying to push her aside, trying to make her invisible. But she wouldn't be erased. Not now. Not ever. What happens when a system built on assumptions, on power, on privilege, is forced to reckon with someone who doesn't play by its rules? What happens when you decide not to fight the system, but to let it expose itself for what it really is? Evelyn didn't need to fight them. She didn't need to confront them. She just needed to act, to make a decision that no one else had the courage to make. And when she opened that envelope, when she signed her name on that document, that was when the world would change. Not because of her anger, not because of her resistance, but because of the quiet power that had been growing inside her all along. She opened the envelope slowly, the sound of the paper unfolding louder than it seemed. Inside, the contents were clear. The final paperwork for the airline merger. The contract that would move millions of dollars across countries, across industries. But more importantly, it was the document that would mark the moment when Evelyn Carter, the woman who had been othered, rejected, and misjudged, would change the very system that had tried to silence her. She could feel it, the weight of it all. The power was in her hands now. The system had tried to reject her. It had tried to push her out. But now, Evelyn held the keys to the future. She wasn't here to beg for permission anymore. She wasn't here to ask for a seat at the table. She was here to make the decisions, to say what belonged and what didn't. And the moment she signed her name on that document was the moment she took the power back. The moment she changed the game. Evelyn took the pen and signed, her hand steady as she wrote her name at the bottom of the page. It was a small action, almost insignificant to anyone else. But to her, it was everything. It was the moment that would change the course of history, not with noise or protest, but with a single, quiet decision. And as she finished, she looked around the cabin, noticing the flight attendants moving past, the passengers lost in their own worlds. None of them knew what had just happened. None of them knew what she had just decided. Have you ever been in a position where you held the power to change everything, but no one expected you to? Have you ever been underestimated, judged, or silenced, only to realize that you were the one in control all along? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. How would you have handled the decision Evelyn just made? What would you have done if you were in her shoes? Let us know. If you're following this story, hit the like button, share it with your friends, and make sure you subscribe. The next chapter will shock you. The system had underestimated Evelyn from the very beginning. It had dismissed her. It had tried to silence her. But as the plane continued to soar through the clouds, Evelyn Carter knew one thing. The world was about to change. And it was all because of a decision, a quiet, powerful decision, that no one had seen coming. The miles passed by. The plane moved steadily through the sky, each second bringing Evelyn closer to her destination. But the journey wasn't just about the miles between the airport and the city she was heading to. It was about the distance between who she had been and who she was about to become. Each moment, each breath, felt like it carried the weight of a choice that would determine the course of everything that followed. Evelyn leaned back in her seat, glancing around at the other passengers. They were lost in their own worlds. The man beside her, now finishing up a conversation with someone on the phone, barely looked her way. The others? They were more concerned with their laptops or their drinks. The quiet hum of the aircraft surrounded her, but she felt like she was in a different world, one where the rules didn't apply to her. Or perhaps it was the other way around. The system had created rules for everyone, but she wasn't everyone. She was Evelyn Carter. It's funny, isn't it? The way we often think we can control everything. Our plans, our actions, the paths we take. But we're all part of a system that's already been designed for us. The system tells you what you should want. It tells you what you should be. It tells you how to dress, how to speak, how to exist. And Evelyn, she had never fit neatly into any of that. She had spent years walking around, quietly observing, never quite belonging to any of the roles that society wanted her to play. But what was she supposed to do with that? Was she supposed to keep playing along? Or was this the moment she was finally ready to confront it all? Evelyn's hand brushed over the envelope again. She had already opened it once, glanced over its contents. She had seen what it meant. It was the final document that would seal the deal on the airline merger. The decision to approve or reject it lay in her hands. But more than that, it carried with it the power to change the industry, to disrupt the system that had always shut people like her out. People who looked like her. People who weren't given the benefit of the doubt. People who were told time and time again that they didn't belong in spaces they were entitled to be in. What happens when you're asked to make a decision that could change everything? When you're asked to take control of something that is bigger than yourself, bigger than your career, bigger than the moment. For Evelyn, this wasn't just about signing a piece of paper. This wasn't just about corporate strategy or airline deals. No, this was about change. This was about the fight she had been waging for years without ever realizing it. It wasn't just about what was in the envelope. It was about what would happen when she signed it. The people who had pushed her aside, the system that had tried to diminish her, they were all about to feel the weight of her decision. The flight attendants passed by her once again. Evelyn didn't flinch. They didn't offer her a drink. They didn't make eye contact. They simply moved on, offering their services to the passengers around her. And there was again the subtle rejection, the quiet message that said, "You don't belong here." She'd already been rejected by the airline's employees, by the system, by everyone who had assumed she didn't belong. And yet, she was sitting there in the most coveted seat on the plane with the power to change everything. That was the irony, wasn't it? They had assumed she was powerless, assumed she was out of place, but it was they who were blind to her true strength. What happens when someone who's been ignored, rejected, and dismissed finally gets the chance to decide for themselves? What happens when the system, this corporate system, this invisible system of privilege, thinks it can make decisions for people like Evelyn, but ends up handing over the reins to her instead? You see, that's the test. Not just for her, but for the entire system. The real test wasn't in the envelope. The real test was in what Evelyn was going to do next. Evelyn let the moments pass, her fingers lightly tapping on the edge of the envelope. She wasn't sure why she was waiting. She wasn't sure if it was a feeling of hesitation or simply the weight of the decision ahead. But she was waiting for something. Not for permission. Not for someone to tell her what to do. No, she was waiting for the right moment to make her move. The world had forced her into this position. The system had forced her to play by its rules, had tried to shut her down, had tried to reject her at every turn. And now, she had the power to change everything. And she would, but in her own time, on her own terms. Every decision she had made so far had been quiet, subtle. But this decision, this one would speak volumes. This one would echo across corporate walls, across industry giants who thought they had everything under control. This was the moment the system would meet its reckoning. And it was going to come not with a bang, but with the soft scratch of a pen across a page. She looked around the cabin, observing the passengers once more. The man beside her, still tapping away at his tablet, didn't even glance up. The flight attendants continued with their service, offering drinks to everyone except her. Evelyn could feel their gaze, even though it wasn't aimed at her directly. It was a collective gaze, one that dismissed her without even trying. And that was the moment she realized something. She had already won. They had already made their mistake by underestimating her, by seeing her as invisible. Now, they were going to pay the price for that mistake. The world moves around you. The system continues to operate, ticking away like a clock that doesn't care about anyone's individual struggles. It moves, indifferent to the quiet defiance of those who challenge it. But what happens when one person, just one, decides to break free? What happens when one person decides that they won't just follow the system's rules? They'll rewrite them. Have you ever been in a position where you knew you had the power to make a change, but the world was pushing back against you? Have you ever been underestimated or dismissed, only to realize you were the one with the power all along? Drop your thoughts in the comments. How do you handle decisions that could change everything? Let us know. And if you've ever faced rejection or exclusion, hit that like button, share this with your friends, and subscribe for what happens next. Trust me, you won't want to miss the next part of this journey. Evelyn Carter wasn't waiting anymore. She had already made her decision. The system had already shown its cracks. And now, it was time for the world to see who was really in control. She wasn't here to make noise. She wasn't here to break the rules. She was here to change them. The moment had arrived. The quiet decisions Evelyn had made, the subtle actions that no one had seen, were about to come crashing into the world they had built. For so long, they had assumed they could control her. They had assumed they could dismiss her. But now, as the plane continued its path through the sky, Evelyn Carter wasn't just a passenger. She was the one who was about to rewrite everything. The executives of the airline merger, still in their own private meeting at the back of the plane, were unaware of the storm brewing. They continued to speak in hushed tones, discussing the final details of the deal, the merger that would shift billions in the industry. They spoke with the confidence of people who believed they controlled everything. But what they didn't know was that the real power wasn't in their hands. It wasn't in the hands of the CEOs or the board members. It wasn't in the hands of the corporate suits who believed they had orchestrated it all. The real power was sitting in 2A. The real power was in the hands of the woman they had ignored, the woman they had dismissed. Evelyn Carter was about to make them see who truly held the reins of this deal. They were about to learn that Evelyn wasn't just a passenger, and she wasn't just a voter on some corporate decision. She was the decision. Evelyn, still calm, still poised, had made her decision. She had signed the document. She had approved the merger. But it wasn't just about the merger. It was about everything it represented. It was about the system that had tried to silence her, that had assumed she couldn't make the decisions they had made for her, that had tried to force her into a box. And now, she was about to expose them all for what they really were, puppets of a system that needed to be shattered. It's one thing to see the system. It's another thing to be the system. Evelyn wasn't here to fight against the corporate world. She wasn't here to create chaos. No, she was here to shift the balance of power. She was here to show them that the rules they had followed, the rules they had forced on people like her, didn't matter anymore. The moment she signed that document was the moment everything changed. And when they saw what she had done, when they realized the power she held in her hands, they would understand that everything they had built was fragile. They would understand that their assumptions had cost them everything. The moment Evelyn handed over the signed document to the flight attendant for final submission, the transformation began. The same flight attendant who had ignored her earlier took the envelope and walked toward the front of the cabin. Evelyn could feel the eyes on her as the tension in the air began to shift. There was no fanfare, no applause, no dramatic shift in the atmosphere. But she could feel it. The system was about to wake up. The thing about power, it doesn't need to make noise. Power doesn't need to announce itself. It doesn't need to shout. Power, in its truest form, is silent. It waits. It observes. And when the time is right, it shifts the very ground beneath you. Evelyn had played her part quietly, with precision. And now, the system was about to collapse under the weight of her action. As the document made its way to the airline executives, Evelyn leaned back in her seat, her gaze still fixed ahead. She wasn't worried about what would happen next. She knew that this moment was the beginning of something much bigger. The corporate world, the executives who had believed they controlled everything, were about to be handed a lesson in humility. They were still talking, still focused on the details of the merger, oblivious to the fact that the very thing they had been planning for months was already slipping out of their hands. They hadn't realized that the true decision-maker wasn't in the room with them. It wasn't in the hands of the big players. No, it was in the hands of the quiet woman sitting in 2A. Evelyn Carter wasn't just a passenger. She was the key to the future of this merger. And when they found out who had signed the deal, who had just decided the fate of the airline industry, they would realize that they had underestimated her in ways they couldn't have imagined. The silence in the air grew, but Evelyn's resolve remained steady. The plane continued on its path, the corporate world continuing its discussions without knowing what had happened. As the flight descended, the truth was on its way. They would soon learn that their carefully constructed world had just been shattered by a single decision, by a woman who was once invisible to them, by the woman they had rejected. What happens when the system is forced to reckon with itself? What happens when the very thing that kept it intact is exposed? What happens when one quiet person, one person who doesn't scream, who doesn't fight, shifts everything with a single decision? Evelyn Carter wasn't just changing the future of merger. She was changing the future. She was breaking the system, not with noise, but with silence. She was proving to them that the real power wasn't in the loudest voice. It was in the quietest one. How would you feel if you had the power to change everything with one decision? How would you handle the responsibility? What if you could shatter the systems that have been in place for so long? Let us know in the comments. How would you take control of a situation like Evelyn's? And if you think the system needs to change, hit that like button, share this with your friends, and subscribe, because what happens next will be the ultimate game changer. Evelyn Carter wasn't just making a decision about a merger. She was making a statement about who gets to decide the fate of the future. The decision was hers. And in the end, the world would have to reckon with the fact that the quietest voices often have the greatest power. The moment Evelyn signed the deal, something shifted. It was subtle at first, like the tremor before an earthquake. It started with small questions, phone calls being made behind closed doors, conversations whispered in urgent tones, and executives who were supposed to be confident, now pacing, unsure. They hadn't realized it yet, but their world was about to crumble. One decision, one quiet moment of power that no one had anticipated was about to explode. Evelyn had been calm, her resolve unshakable. The envelope was now just another piece of paper in her hands, but what it represented was far beyond the ink and signatures. It was the tipping point, the final decision that not only determined the merger, but also shattered the very assumptions the system had built around people like her. She had quietly, but decisively stolen control. What happens when a world of control, of power, is turned upside down? When the walls of privilege and assumptions come crashing down in one swift, silent moment. The corporate executives didn't just lose control of a deal. They lost their grip on everything they thought they understood. They thought Evelyn was just another unimportant figure, just a name on a list, but they were wrong. So wrong. As the flight continued, the news hit the corporate offices. The ones who had been expecting their next victory, their next step in domination, were instead facing an utter disaster. News spread faster than they had anticipated. Evelyn Carter wasn't just the deciding vote. She had silently flipped the entire equation upside down, and the consequences were immediate. Executives who had spent months preparing, building their plans around their surefire success, suddenly found themselves reeling from the shock. Their world had been built on certainty, on assumptions about who had the power and who didn't. And now, They realized that one quiet, seemingly insignificant decision could unmake everything. A shadow had slipped through their defenses, and they didn't even know it until it was too late. Phone calls were made. Memos were sent. Plans that had been put into place for months now felt precarious, like fragile glass ready to shatter at any moment. The higher-ups, those who had been so confident in their positions, were now scrambling to hold everything together. But the foundation was cracked, and Evelyn had already started the chain reaction that would dismantle it all. It's often said that power is like a house of cards. One wrong move, one small nudge, and everything collapses. Evelyn had been that nudge, that one moment. And now the people who had felt safe, who had thought they were untouchable, were feeling the walls close in on them. The mistake wasn't just signing the document. It was underestimating who she was. And now they had to deal with the consequences of that mistake. In the corporate offices, panic was beginning to set in. The merger was stalled, the approval had been made, but now there were questions about its legitimacy. The executives, who had been so sure of their power, were being questioned by the board, by their investors, by the people who had given them the resources to continue their deal. They were questioning Evelyn's authority, her power, and whether they had the right to go forward with their plans. The real consequence wasn't in the contract. It wasn't the money they stood to lose. No, the real consequence was that they were being forced to confront their own biases. The moment they had dismissed Evelyn as just another passenger was the moment they had signed their fate. They thought their wealth and status would shield them. They thought their position at the top would protect them. But Evelyn wasn't like them. She didn't need to play by their rules. She wasn't here to follow their lead. She was here to redefine the system, to show them how fragile their world really was. As the executives met in emergency sessions, the reality of their failure sank in. They couldn't figure out how Evelyn had managed to get control of the deal. They couldn't figure out how one quiet decision had shifted the balance of everything they had spent years building. They had no idea how much they had underestimated her. But now, as the room grew more frantic, the cracks in the system started to show themselves. They had failed to account for one thing. Someone like Evelyn had the power to bring it all down. And now, the system was buckling under the pressure. Every decision they had made, every assumption they had built their world on, was being tested. The board was questioning their decisions. Investors were starting to pull out. The ripple effect of Evelyn's quiet decision was starting to hit hard. And it was only a matter of time before the full weight of it came crashing down. The system had made a fatal mistake. And the consequences? Well, they were just beginning. Back on the plane, Evelyn remained unaware of the chaos she had caused. She wasn't thinking about the deal anymore. She wasn't thinking about the merger. She wasn't thinking about the executives or the power she had just claimed. No, Evelyn Carter was simply watching the world unravel, knowing that the silent choices she had made had already set things in motion. The system that had rejected her, dismissed her, and looked the other way had now been forced to face her. And it was going to have to learn how to adapt. There are moments in life when a world you've known shatters, when everything you believed to be true falls apart. Evelyn had just become the catalyst for that change. And the system? It wasn't going to come back from this. It wasn't going to recover. Because once someone exposes the flaws, once someone challenges the foundation of the world you've built, there's no going back. It was over for them. But for Evelyn, this was only the beginning. How do you react when you realize that your actions have started to change the course of everything around you? Have you ever made a decision that shook everything up, even if no one saw it coming? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Would you have done what Evelyn did? And if you've ever felt the weight of having power but not knowing how to use it, hit that like button, subscribe, and share this story. What happens next will leave you speechless. Evelyn Carter had done it. The system had been shaken. The consequences were unfolding, and there was no stopping it now. But the question remained, how far would the ripple effects go? How much of the world, the system, would be left standing once Evelyn was done? It was over. The system, the assumptions, the walls they had built, they were all crumbling. The moment Evelyn Carter signed that document, the world had changed. But what no one expected was that the change would be so profound. It wasn't just about the corporate merger. It wasn't just about the billion-dollar deal. No, this was about the moment when the system realized that the quietest voices often have the loudest impact. The aftermath of Evelyn's decision spread quickly. News of the shift in the airline's deal, the sudden and unexpected approval by the woman who had been treated like any other passenger, shook the very foundation of the corporate world. The boardroom discussions that had once been filled with pride and self-assurance were now filled with panic and regret. Executives scrambled to manage the fallout. Investors pulled their support. The corporate world wasn't just in disarray, it was exposed. They had assumed they were untouchable. They had assumed they could control the narrative. But Evelyn had proven them wrong. She hadn't fought them head-on. She hadn't caused chaos or protest. No, she had simply made one decision, the right decision, and let the rest fall apart. They thought they were the ones in control, but in the end, it was her that had written the future. Corporate leaders, investors, and even the passengers who had silently watched her on the plane were beginning to grasp the true nature of Evelyn's influence. Her calm, her quiet resolve had shaken them to their core. The world they had built was fragile, and Evelyn had exposed it for everyone to see. Evelyn Carter wasn't just a footnote in a corporate merger. She was the catalyst for a change that went beyond the industry. She had done more than make a corporate decision. She had made a statement about who gets to decide, who gets to hold the power, and who gets to be heard. She had turned the tables, and now, those who once ruled with arrogance and assumption were the ones struggling to maintain their footing. As the weeks went by, the airline's internal culture began to shift. Policies that had once excluded people like Evelyn started to be questioned. The executives were forced to face the reality of their biases. They had underestimated the power of someone they had dismissed. And in the aftermath, they were forced to confront their own flaws, their own assumptions about who belonged in the spaces they controlled. But for Evelyn, she wasn't concerned with the fallout. She wasn't worried about their struggle. She had changed the game. The system was never meant to bend to her. It was meant to bend to the truth, a truth they had refused to see. She had quietly rewritten the rules, and in doing so, had proven that the loudest voices don't always carry the most weight. Sometimes, the most powerful actions come from those who are ignored, dismissed, and rejected. Evelyn stepped away from the chaos that followed her decision. She didn't need to make headlines. She didn't need the world to know her name. What mattered was that she had changed the world in the way that mattered most. Quietly, steadily, and with unshakable resolve. What would you do if you had the power to change everything? What happens when the world doesn't see you, but you still have the strength to change the system from the inside? Think about your own moments of being underestimated. How did you handle it? Could you, like Evelyn, find the courage to make a quiet stand that turns the world upside down? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you've ever faced a situation where you were dismissed, where you had to fight for your place, we want to hear from you. Let us know your thoughts. Let's keep this conversation going. This story isn't just about Evelyn Carter. It's about all of us. It's about challenging the system, about shifting power, and about proving that you don't need to yell to be heard. If you enjoyed this story and want more exclusive, thought-provoking content like this, hit the subscribe button. Stay tuned, because we have many more real stories that will make you think, make you feel, and most importantly, make you question everything.